On a warm July day in 1789, Parisians bought bread from crowded bakeries, discussed rising prices in cafés, and went about their routines in a city simmering with unrest. The streets of Paris, a labyrinth of narrow cobblestone paths lined with timber-framed houses and grander stone buildings, buzzed with the familiar rhythm of daily life. Yet beneath this surface normalcy lay a profound tension, born from years of economic hardship and political dissatisfaction. The year had begun with promise, as King Louis XVI convened the Estates General in May to address the kingdom's financial woes, but by early July, hope had curdled into frustration. The Third Estate, representing the common people, had declared itself the National Assembly, demanding reforms, while rumors of royal plots swirled like the dust kicked up by passing carriages. In the working-class neighborhoods of the Faubourg Saint-Antoine, artisans and laborers rose before dawn. Men like Pierre, a cabinet maker in his mid-30s, would kiss his wife goodbye and head to his workshop, tools slung over his shoulder. The air carried the scent of wood shavings and the distant clang of hammers from nearby forges. Pierre's family, like many, subsisted on a diet dominated by bread, coarse, dark loaves made from rye or barley when wheat was scarce. But in 1789, scarcity was the norm. The harvest of 1788 had been disastrous, ravaged by hailstorms and drought, driving the price of a 4-pound loaf to 14 sous, nearly a full day's wage for an unskilled worker. Bakeries opened early, their ovens belching smoke into the morning haze, but lines formed long before, with women clutching baskets and children fidgeting at their sides. Grumbles about the cost were commonplace. Some whispered of hoarders and speculators manipulating the market, while others blamed the king's ministers for failing to regulate grain supplies. As the sun climbed higher, the markets came alive. The Les Halles Central Market, a sprawling complex of pavilions and stalls, teemed with vendors hawking fruits, vegetables, cheeses, and meats. Fishmongers from the Seine shouted their wares, their tables slick with scales and water. Butchers displayed joints of beef and pork, though these luxuries were beyond the reach of most Parisians. The poor relied on cheaper offal or went without protein altogether. Haggling was fierce as housewives stretched their meager coins. Amid the chatter, news spread orally, tales of the National Assembly's debates at Versailles, where deputies like Mirabeau and Sieyès argued for a constitution. Pamphlets, printed clandestinely and sold for a few sous, circulated among the literate, fueling discussions. One popular tract, What is the Third Estate, by Abbé Sieyès, asserted that the common people were the true nation, a radical idea that resonated in these crowded spaces. By midday, the cafés along the boulevards filled with a mix of bourgeois merchants, intellectuals, and idle nobles. Establishments like the Café de Foy in the Palais-Royal gardens were hotspots for political discourse. The Palais-Royal, owned by the Duke of Orleans, a cousin of the king sympathetic to reform, served as an unofficial forum. Its arcades sheltered orators who mounted tables to decry the aristocracy's privileges. On July 11th, word arrived of Finance Minister Jacques Necker's dismissal. Necker, a Swiss banker seen as a champion of the people for his attempts to curb noble exemptions from taxes, was a symbol of hope. His removal, announced amid gatherings in the gardens, sparked outrage. Patrons in the cafés debated fiercely. Was this the start of a conservative backlash? Would troops loyal to the king suppress the assembly? The streets reflected this growing anxiety. Royal troops, including Swiss and German regiments, had been stationed around Paris since late June, ostensibly to maintain order, but perceived by many as a threat. Soldiers in blue coats and tricorn hats patrolled key intersections, their bayonets glinting in the sunlight. Parisians eyed them warily, recalling past interventions. Yet life continued. Apprentices ran errands for their masters, carrying parcels through the throngs. Seamstresses bent over needles in dimly lit garrets, producing garments for the affluent. In wealthier quarters, like the Marais, nobles and financiers hosted salons where enlightened ideas from Voltaire and Rousseau were dissected over tea. But even here, unease permeated. Some aristocrats quietly prepared to flee, sensing the winds of change. As evening approached, families gathered for sparse meals. In a typical household, soup made from vegetables and perhaps a scrap of bacon might accompany the precious bread. Children played in the streets until dusk, their games interrupted by the cries of news vendors hawking broadsheets. The Seine River, bisecting the city, saw boatmen ferrying goods, while washerwomen kneeled on its banks, pounding linens. Bridges like the Pont Neuf bustled with pedestrians, street performers, and pickpockets. The air grew thick with the smells of cooking fires and the effluent from open sewers, a reminder of the city's overcrowded conditions. Nearly 600,000 souls crammed into an area that strained its infrastructure. On July 12th, the simmering unrest boiled over slightly. Crowds, fueled by the Necker news, paraded busts of the dismissed minister and the Duke of Orleans through the streets. Demonstrations turned violent as people attacked customs posts at the city's gates, where taxes on incoming goods inflated prices. Flames licked the barriers as mobs set them ablaze, protesting the octroi duties that made wine and food dearer. Royal troops intervened in places like the Tuileries Gardens, charging into gatherings and prompting stone-throwing in retaliation. By July 13th, the search for arms intensified. Bands roamed, looting gun shops and demanding weapons from the Hôtel des Invalides, a veterans' hospital housing cannons and muskets. The city watch, the Garde Française, showed sympathy to the people, some even deserting to join the crowds. Yet amid this escalation, ordinary routines persisted. Priests conducted masses in churches like Notre Dame, where the faithful sought solace. Booksellers along the quays displayed forbidden works, risking censorship. In the Latin Quarter, students from the Sorbonne debated philosophy, blending academic pursuits with revolutionary fervor. Women, often the backbone of household economies, managed the queues and barters, their resilience a quiet force. The elderly recounted stories of past hardships, the famines of the 1770s, the American war's drain on treasuries, drawing parallels to the present crisis. Paris in early July 1789 was a city of contrasts, beauty and squalor, hope and despair. Grand avenues like the Champs-Élysées contrasted with fetid alleys. The Louvre, still a royal palace, stood as a symbol of monarchical splendor, while nearby slums housed the destitute. The weather, unusually warm, amplified the discomfort. Sweat-swatched clothing clung to bodies as people navigated the heat. Street lamps lit by oil flickered on at nightfall, casting shadows where whispers of conspiracy thrived. The Bastille fortress loomed on the eastern edge, its 8 towers a grim reminder of arbitrary imprisonment, though it held few prisoners then, mostly forgers and the insane. Parisians passed it daily, scarcely imagining it as the flashpoint it would become. The economic pressures were unrelenting. Unemployment plagued the silk weavers and furniture makers as luxury trades suffered from court austerity. Guild regulations stifled innovation, while feudal dues lingered in the countryside, affecting urban food supplies. Intellectuals in academies pondered reforms, but for the average Parisian, survival was paramount. Charity from convents and philanthropists provided meager relief. Soup kitchens doled out broth to the indigent. Yet solidarity emerged. Neighbors shared what little they had, fostering a communal spirit that would soon ignite. As the days progressed, the atmosphere thickened. Orators in the Palais-Royal called for vigilance against royal machinations. Camille Desmoulins, a young journalist, harangued crowds as his words echoed off the colonnades. The National Assembly's defiance inspired pride, but fears of dissolution loomed. Troops encamped on the Champ de Mars added to the paranoia. By the evening of July 13th, Paris felt like a powder keg, with armed groups patrolling and bonfires lighting the night. Still, many retired to their beds, unaware that the morrow would shatter the fragile peace.